Ray Harryhausen refers to them as creatures. They're never monsters as far as he's concerned. So what's the difference? What is a monster?
Me first?
Yeah, Tony, yeah. Put you on the spot.
Oh yes, Ray's very careful. None of his films are horror films, they're fantasy films. They're particularly... Ray has his own genre. I think, this is my words, not Ray's. Ray has his own genre. There are 16 movies by Ray, 16 feature films, and they're of a particular type of film. None of them are horror films. We just had a big argument with the publisher of the 5th book, and they put a kind of a font on the top that looked like a horror film, something from Hammer, and we said, no. We go out of our way to say they are creatures. Ray will call them misunderstood creatures, as simple as that, because none of them actually had a say in what they do. I mean, even Medusa was turned into a monster, if you like, by the gods. And the emir was brought back from Venus, not his fault, like King Kong. King Kong was brought back to New York against his will. So very specifically, they're not specifically monsters in that sense, but of course they had huge influence on everybody else.
I would suggest monsters are sort of metaphors for people gone wrong by seeing our darker souls through the perspective of something nasty. We understand ourselves. There, but for the grace of God, go us, I think. Maybe that's what monsters are.
I wonder if we should just now talk a little bit about Ray Harryhausen's career in terms of he was obviously, we've talked about King Kong, Willis O'Brien, 1933, a huge influence for Ray. And he met Willis O'Brien, who gave him some advice about what he should do and actually then worked with him on Mighty Joe Young in 1949. Can we just talk a little bit about Ray's career in terms of why he is so influential?
I think he put on the screen what other films had promised. But also what gives Ray's creatures believability is the fact that they move in a certain way. His animation is extraordinary. I know I'm a sucker because I know Ray very well, but I love the Cyclops. I mean, I just love the Cyclops, and the arms sort of go back, and that impressed people. Still does, doesn't it?
Yes.
I mean, he does this, and he holds the hands up.
Well,
but I asked Ray very quickly. Why did you do that? And he said, well, give them something to do with their arms, because otherwise they're just hanging there. And that's how he does it. And that gives it character. Sorry.
Okay, speaking from the animation point of view, 2 points to think about. There's always a thought process in his characters and little bits of detail. Going back to King Kong, there's a fantastic moment in King Kong when Kong has killed the T-Rex, and then he's snapped his jaw, and then he just flips the jaw to see if the T-Rex is still alive, and he suddenly thinks, there's this huge big mother of a gorilla, and he's got a moment of doubt, and there's a bit of humanity, and that is carried on through all Ray's work.
Yeah, it is those little moments with the jaw, with the skeletons. It's that little moment when they've all stood up, and then as one they all kind of like go into this position together, and they work.
It makes them curiously human by putting that in. And that's something that CG doesn't always do.
And the sound.
Yes.
And the music, of course. We have Bernard Herrmann.
That's why I used Bernard Herrmann's music for the montage, because he liked Bernard Herrmann very much, and they got on very well.
It complemented everything beautifully.
And in a way, Ray's films are like musicals, where you get a bit of plot, and then a great song comes along, except it's a monster or a creature. And they're structured like musicals.
Ray likes musicals.
Good.
He's a great musical fan, so there you are.
Can he sing?
No,
yes,
I don't
we won't go there.
Not as far as I know.
Obviously,
there we go. Harryhausen, the musical. I'm going to write it.
We thought we'd do a secret to Harry Potter and call it Harryhausen and something, but we haven't got around to that yet.
So in Dog Soldiers, for example, which was on an incredibly low budget, you, I guess, had decisions to make about how much you showed and what you could show in terms of getting away with something on such a low budget. Can you just tell us a little bit about your sort of thinking behind what you did show and actually how you achieved what you achieved in that film?
Well, it ties in with what these guys are saying, which is, and I think it was an interview with Ridley Scott years ago when he just after he'd made Alien or Blade Runner or something like that, and he said that if you can shoot it for real, because it's always going to look better. If you get it in camera, it will always look better, and it will stand the test of time. And I totally agree with that. And be it stop motion, be it makeup, be it animatronics or whatever, they're all actual, real, tangible things that you're catching on camera, and that translates out of the screen. And I think a lot that's part of it. I think the other part is that it's one or two people maybe who are doing it. In Ray's case, it was one guy, whereas in a lot of the computer animation stuff, it's like 50, 100 guys who are working on this thing. And I think that the humanity or that craft kind of gets dissipated.
Yes, I mean we
gets
mustn't
watered down a little bit.
Yes, we mustn't dish CG because there are some amazing things.
Incidentally, Ray thinks CG is great before anybody asks that question, because they always do. He always says it's another tool, and I think that's a very good description. It is another new tool to the special effects toolbox, I suppose, and it's how you use that tool. It's how Ray used his. It's how you use that.
I'm really glad you said that, because that brings us on to, I think kind of quite pointing out to the next sort of the latter part of the discussion, which is really looking more in the future. I mean, obviously, Ray's last film was The Clash of the Titans. His last film that he kind of worked on in the same way. And since then, there have been obviously a lot of people who have been, which we've talked about, very influenced by his work. Tim Burton, for example, very noticeably. And as we now move into sort of the next decade, where do we see kind of the kind of work that Ray has done on stop motion and so forth going? I mean, I know there's Frankenweenie and other stuff coming up, but obviously increasingly the pressures are on there to keep pushing CGI forward and to keep doing everything. I mean, what do you see as the future for that?
Well, I think what we mustn't forget is when things like Kong were made, there was literally no other way to do that. They did talk about men in suits and real gorillas, but not to get a performance out of it. So stop motion has been the only way to do such effects. Now CG has taken a bit of that burden off it, and I think is releasing stop motion to let it be stop motion and to really enjoy the artifice. Films like Fantastic Mr. Fox are not for 1 second pretending they are real life. Stop motion will always look like stop motion, and we love it for that. We love it for that. But now CG has shown that it can be integrated, animation can be integrated into live action seamlessly. I think animation is now being liberated into, let's enjoy it. It's going to look like stop motion. Let's say this is a puppet. Like just down the road, Warhorse, the most popular show in London, not for 1 second is it saying this is a real horse. It's a puppet. There are the operators, Let's enjoy the artifice, I think.
Well, I have a thing about CG. I think when you're talking about creatures, monsters, CG is fantastic. Don't get me wrong, it really is. But stop motion has a fantasy quality about it, and I'm sorry to be slightly old-fashioned. It still does. That really meets the quality of fantasy. The trouble is, CG can make it so real. It sometimes it isn't fantastic enough. It's just too real. I think Jurassic Park worked very well, and there are lots of other examples. I think where CG works is tidal waves and buildings collapsing, and I think that's brilliant. You couldn't do that in stop motion. Ray tried in Earth Versus, but he couldn't do it.
I think, again, something like Talos, it is important that you do know it's a puppet.
Yes, I agree.
And you're watching it. It's like Wallace and Gromit. It's a lump of clay, and yet I'm laughing, I'm crying, whatever. And it's like watching a fantastic ballerina doing Swan Lake, doing 32 frottes. It's beautiful, it's great, and you think, how the fuck is she doing that? You're aware of the physical limitations, and I think when we're changing bodies into werewolves and puppets into 60-foot things, we're aware of the limitations, and we're going, wow.
Ray built his models to be shot in close-up most of the time, with very, 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 very rare exceptions. Medusa, all the close-ups are the actual model. The model is that high, and it is extraordinary, the detail in that model. And he always built them so you could shoot them. And there was no, when the tiger, you see a full face of the tiger, that is the model tiger. He always built in huge detail, and he built them himself. One mustn't forget that. He cooked them in his own kitchen oven.
And the thing about, I guess, as an animator, and when you're working on any sequence that involves either stop motion or any kind of animation, really, it's a huge amount of patience, and the time that it takes to, like for Ray to manipulate each one of those creatures to make them move, and then to just shoot, move. I mean, absolutely astonishing.
Yeah, you have to be patient. But if somebody dares get in front of me in the queue, in a train queue, I will not patient, I tell you that. I have patience for that, yes.
Yes, Ray learnt about patience. For those animators amongst you, he has a lovely story which always makes me laugh. I'm sorry, we're slightly off the key here, but very quickly, when he was a very young guy working in his hobby house, as he calls it, which is his studio at home, he had painted a prehistoric forest on a sheet of glass, which was about 8 feet across by about 4 or 5 feet high. And he meticulously done this in the Gustave Doré fashion, you know, on the front of the glass, like O'Brien did for King Kong. And it had taken him about 7 or 8 days to do this, to finish it to perfection the way he liked it. And he was animating, and he lost his temper, and threw the hammer. He had a hammer in his hand, and he threw it on the floor, and it bounced up and went straight through this pane of glass. It took him another 8 days to paint that pane of glass. And from that day, he said, I had to keep my patience, and it is difficult. I've never been an animator, so I don't know.
But, you know, I would just say to any animator, that's what it is.
Yes.
You know, you're going to shoot 8 seconds in a day, get over it.
Yes.
And in
It's the
terms
first
that's
law,
what it
isn't
is.
it, really? Patience.
Yes. Gilbert and Sullivan said in one of their operas, "It seems to me to be nonsense. Ah, but what precious nonsense."
Yes.